Our first speaker today is Victoria Lustig. Victoria is an equine studies major in the honors program, and her research is into the historical and ideological formation of groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. She offers important insights into the modern Islamic reform movements, especially as they relate to legacies of European and American intervention in predominantly Muslim countries. Her work serves as a vivid reminder that Islam is not a monolithic set of beliefs and practices, but a vibrant and profound tradition, even in its most radical forms. Ultimately, Victoria demonstrates that effective resistance to groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS requires genuine and sustained dialogue with Muslims rather than the fearful isolationism or colonial intervention. Given the state of our current political discourse, these findings are not just helpful, but essential. On a more personal note, working with Victoria, and this is from her advisor actually, working with Victoria has been a pleasure. She came to the first meeting of the year with an entire suitcase of books to discuss. Not a weekend bag, not a gym bag, but a kind of wheeled suitcase that you could take on a week-long vacation. That's commitment. So without further ado, Victoria. I'll come this way if that's okay. Okay.
On April 13th, the United States dropped its largest non-nuclear bomb on ISIS militants in Afghanistan. Just the week before, on April 6th, the United States dropped 59 Tomahawk missiles on a Syrian airbase. So my question is, why is ISIS in Afghanistan? Who are the Taliban? Is Al-Qaeda involved in any of these events? What is the Syrian civil war? And are any of these groups really Islamic? I was in a high school class on Islam when I first started to think about questions like these. It was around that same time that I started to talk to people about the topic of Islam. It became apparent very quickly that I barely understood what was being reported in the news about Islam, let alone anything deeper. It was that realization that set me on my journey today. My junior year of college rolled around, and it came time for me to pick a topic to write a senior thesis on. I remembered these questions I had had in high school. And even though they weren't related to either of my majors of equine studies or business management, I figured they were important enough and relevant enough that I needed to do some research. The result is my senior thesis, which traces the lineage and development of radical Islamic thought. This research is unique in both its historical detail and its current relevance. Although my research is genealogical in nature, it follows the social, political, religious, and historical phenomenon of this group. What I will be presenting to you today is the linguistic element of my research. I will be taking you through the process that I went through as I began this research. I will start by talking about the word radical and its associations with the word Islam. From there, I will move on to talking about Islamism, its original definition, and its current implications. From there, I will move on to talking about terrorism and the connotations of using the phrase Islamic terrorism. It is essential that we discuss and understand these words, for as a nation of individuals, leaders, and policymakers, we use these words to connect individuals to events. And in making these connections and using these words, we are shaping how we, as an American people, will react. Radical Islam. We, as an American people, have a pretty good understanding of the implications of radical Islam. In the most basic terms, radical Islam has come to mean that people are killing themselves or others in the name of Islam. But that's only its implication. What does it actually mean? Let's start with the word radical. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines radical 3 ways: of, relating to, or proceeding from a root; of or relating to an origin; or very different from the usual or traditional. This third definition goes on to be described as having extremely different social or political views not shared by most people. There's something incredibly important in this third definition that we can't miss. Radical, as part of its explicit definition, means that those who hold this view are in the minority. Thus, if the word radical is applied to social groups, political movements, or religious factions, it automatically tells us that these individuals are in the minority and their view is not shared by the rest of their social group, political party, or religious sect. For me, radical Islam is an appropriate term to talk about groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Because at the heart of it, when we are talking about radical Islam, we are fundamentally talking about a small group who claim a version of Islamic ideology that they deem most correct, yet which is not accepted by the majority of the Muslim community. Islamism. Of all the words I present to you today, Islamism, in its explicit definition, is perhaps the most contested. In the early 1900s, Islamism was used interchangeably with words like Islam or Islamic. Later, however, during the 1930s, with the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then later, in the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Islamism became more political. In other words, Islamism came to mean merging Islamic law and doctrine with political ideology and discourse. As with so many other things relating to Islam, Islamism has a distinct pre- and post-9/11 meaning. After the September 11th attacks, Islamism became less political and more violent. This was only strengthened by its connections to violent extremist groups, as well as militant Islam. Finally, we get to the word terrorism. We hear a lot about terrorism today. We hear about acts of terrorism, different kinds of terrorism, and terrorists. Without even understanding the ideology behind these groups, we can learn something about their goals simply from the word terrorism. At the very heart of terrorism is the word terror. Terror is a state of intense fear. It therefore makes sense that terrorism is defined as the systematic use of terror, especially as a means of coercion. Thus, terror, when applied to a group, tells us that their goal is to use fear as a weapon to destabilize, intimidate, or otherwise coerce a group of people or society. Islamic terrorism. Of the many questions that has been asked in our political sphere today, one of them is whether the American people should use the word Islamic terrorism. President Obama refused to use the words Islamic terrorism, yet his successor, President Trump, has several times referred to radical Islamic terrorism. The question at the heart of this issue is whether the American people, if they refuse to use the words Islamic terrorism, are we simply denying the true nature of the threat? On the other hand, if we do use the phrase Islamic terrorism, are we sending a message to 1.7 billion Muslims that the US is at war with Islam, or else that Islam as a religion is to blame for these terror attacks? This is statistically untrue. The majority of Muslims have no connection or support for terrorist activity. Furthermore, more Muslims are killed by acts of terrorism than members of any other religious group. As I have done before, I will break down the words Islamic terrorism and see if we can uncover what it really means. Oh my God, why is this not turning? We know that the word Islamic simply means relating to Islam, and we've already learned the definition of terrorism. So if you put those two together, you have a systematic use of terror that is related to Islam. That is a problematic definition. That is so easily misinterpreted to mean that Islam as a whole religion uses terror as a weapon. Furthermore, it could mean that Muslims around the world support the use of terrorism. Now, if we add just one word to this phrase, the word radical, we change its meaning. Now, if we say radical Islamic terrorism, we are talking about a small, extreme sect related to Islam that uses terror as a weapon. Thus, for me, I do not believe we can wholly disassociate Islam from the acts of terror done in its name. At the same time, it is untrue and harmful to believe that these acts of terrorism are in any way representative of Islam as a religion. Why do these words matter? I did not come here today to prove a point. I did not come here today to make you believe me. I did not come here today to persuade any of you to become activists, nor is this a call to action. I came here today to ask you to take responsibility. Whatever words you choose to use, take responsibility for their meanings and their implications. Our words shape our reactions and the reactions of others around us. So my question to you now is, what will you call it? Thank you.